Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Tommy Johnson. I'm with the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Eaton Peabody's Growth Basics for Business. This is our monthly breakfast seminar series, which provides a forum to gain useful do-it-yourself workplace solutions and insightful, actionable tips. I want to thank Eaton Peabody for allowing us to bring you this virtual event for this entire season. I'd like to welcome you all to this final installment of Growth Basics for the calendar year 2022. However, this 10-part season-long series runs from September through June 2023. Today's topic, the benefits of creating a podcast, is presented by Nancy Marshall from Marshall Communications and Peter Koch of MEMIC, two chamber members with experience utilizing podcasting for their organizations and clients. Now, like all Chamber's virtual signature event series, today's presentation is free and will be recorded and made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. To keep up to date on all Chamber news and events, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, and check out our events page and sign up for our weekly email newsletter while you're there. Before we get to today's presentation, I want to mention again that we're using a new platform this year for all of our signature events called StreamYard. This platform allows a much greater improved production and interaction elements that I think you'll be happy to see if you haven't experienced it before. I'd also like to remind you, if you have questions for our presenters, please type them in the YouTube chat and they'll be relayed to our presenters throughout the presentation. We'll also save a little bit of time for Q&A at the conclusion of the event too. Now, at this time, I'd like to acknowledge our presenting sponsor for Growth Basics for Business, Eaton Peabody. For the last 5 years, Eaton Peabody has been the presenting sponsor of this series, and they continue their support this season. Let me introduce to you now Marketing Director from Eaton Peabody, Nate Levesque, to say a few words. Take it away, Nate.
Great. Thank you, Tommy. I want to thank the Portland Chamber for doing such a great job of putting these together and providing new and engaging content month after month. I also want to thank the presenters, Nancy and Peter, for taking time out of their day to join us. Eaton Peabody has not produced a podcast in the past, so I'm really interested to learn more today. Lastly, whether this is your first Growth Basics event or your 10th, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. For those of you that may not be familiar with our firm, we are a full-service, Maine-based law firm with nearly 50 attorneys serving Maine clients from offices in Augusta, Bangor, Ellsworth, and Portland. We assist companies of all sizes in a variety of industries. So whether you're an established financial institution or a small business just taking your first steps, we can help with all your legal needs. To learn more about the services that we provide in the industries that we serve, please visit our website, eatonpeabody.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn for future presentations and legal updates. Thank you. Back to you, Tommy.
Thanks, Nate. Really appreciate the support this entire year. Now, with us today are our presenters, Nancy Marshall and Peter Koch. Nancy Marshall, aka the PR Maven, founded Marshall Communications in 1991. 31 years later, with her strong entrepreneurial spirit, the agency has represented many major clients, including the Maine Office of Tourism, the Maine Office of Business Development, and the Orvis Company, among many others. Nancy's hallmark is her commitment to living clients' businesses. She's also the host of the PR Maven Podcast, which you'll hear a lot about today, and the author of 2 books, PR Works and Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. Peter Koch of MEMIC has more than 38 years of experience in the New England recreation industry, including 20 years working in or managing many aspects of the ski industry, including mountain operations, resort services, lodging, and food service. Because the ski industry is so diverse, combining hospitality with construction, healthcare, manufacturing, and outdoor rec, Peter has experience with almost all categories of business which are insured by MEMIC. Peter's also an authorized instructor in both the OSHA 10-hour construction and the OSHA General Industry Outreach Training Program, and teaches workshops for MEMIC ranging from safety leadership and ergonomics to fall protection and high-angle rescue. He's also the host of MEMIC's Safety Experts podcast. With that, let's get to our presentation. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Tommy. It's nice
Thanks,
to
Tommy.
be here.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks for having us on. We appreciate it. Really excited to talk about podcasting, something that Nancy and I are both fairly passionate about.
Yeah, so Peter and I came together because for one thing, we have a shared interest in the ski business. I had started my career in the ski business. And then in 2018, I launched the PR Maven podcast. And since then, I've put out with my team over 215 episodes of the podcast. And then in 2019, my agency worked with Peter and his team at MEMIC to help them create what we call a Marshall Plan for the launch of the Safety Experts, which actually included naming the podcast. And since 2019, Peter and his team have created 87 episodes of the podcast. So we could go ahead and launch our slideshow. Yeah, Peter was the most popular guest of the PR Maven podcast actually in 2021. So we had a party to celebrate. And actually this photo was just a few weeks ago at the party to celebrate Tim Winkler from VIP Tires and Service, who was the most popular guest of 2022. So we can go to the next. So yeah, here's Peter and me, and we're very proud to host our podcasts. So around 2016 or 2017, everything is sort of blurry pre-pandemic. I feel like it's BC, you know. But anyway, before the pandemic, I started learning a lot about what I call content marketing or authority marketing, which is essentially creating content and putting it out on the internet to help establish your authority in a certain area. And of course, I was interested in establishing my teams and my own authority in public relations and marketing. So the podcast was sort of a part of that overall strategy for authority marketing. And then Peter, I'll let him talk about why they started the Safety Experts podcast.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nancy. MEMIC has a lot of resources out there, and we've been around for a while, not as long as many insurance companies, but we're coming up on 30 years and doing. We try to provide a lot of different resources for our policyholders and for the community as well. And my manager and I, Rod Stanley, were sitting down one day over coffee talking about how best can we get information about safety into people's hands. And we got to talking about what we do individually around the house on the weekend or when we're traveling someplace. And we found in common that we listen to podcasts often. And honestly, we listened to a number of the same podcasts together. So we talked about episodes, and this was pretty neat. And the idea came out that, well, we could do a podcast. We have a lot of expertise, not in podcasting, but we have a lot of expertise in safety. And this audio media is a really good way to get information into people's hands in a different way. So not so much I've got to go download a document or download a poster or download something from the internet or find it in a book, but I can listen to something that would complement something I already have. So we brought that idea together. We did a couple of proof of concept episodes with internal guests that we had as experts. And then we realized, well, we have most of the information together, but we really needed a little bit of help to work on the strategy, because it does take a little bit more than just a microphone and a set of headphones and a computer to make the podcast work and work well. So we reached out to Nancy because we had a relationship with Marshall Communications in the past, and we asked them to come in and help us not only on strategy, but what we can do to put this together in a practical way and make it not only functional for us, but sustainable.
You can go to the next. Yes, so we helped MEMIC create an overall strategy, and podcasting is a good part of a marketing strategy. I always say that a brand is all about building an audience and building a tribe of raving fans, and podcasting is really good at generating really loyal fans. 41% of all Americans tune into a podcast every month, and 28% do it weekly. There's 420 million podcast listeners in the world, and it really helps you create a passionately engaged audience of listeners. It helps rank your brand as an authoritative brand, and podcasting is fairly affordable. It's also flexible because people can either listen when you first launch it or launch it live. We actually use this same platform that the Chamber uses for this event, the StreamYard, and people can actually watch my podcast live on StreamYard or actually YouTube. We use LinkedIn and we use Facebook. So there's a lot of different ways people can either watch the video or listen while they're doing something else, multitasking. A lot of people do that. They'll listen while they're driving or while they're exercising or while they're cleaning the house or organizing their desk. So ideally, podcasts help create relationships with your listeners. So your brand strengthens its relationships with the listeners. Another thing I have found, and Peter, I'm sure that you have found this too, it helps strengthen the relationship with the guest, because if you have a guest and you're having a conversation for 30 to 40 minutes, that really wouldn't happen otherwise. So it's, this allows you to have a really in-depth conversation with someone. And I find that it really helps to strengthen the relationships.
Yeah,
you
end up learning more about the person, and you can ask, especially in the podcast realm, you can ask a question that you might end up going down a rabbit hole for a little while and find out more about the information that they have. It's a great medium for building that relationship. And also, once the podcast is over, then that relationship continues. Like you and I, Nancy, you've been on my podcast or the MEMIC podcast, and I've been on the PR Maven podcast. And prior to that, we've known each other through the ski industry. Like, we both have the history in the ski industry, but we found out a lot about each other, and that continues when we see each other, whether it be in public or at an event someplace, having conversations about the things that we do and following up on the different projects we've got going, or just recreationally. When was the last time you went skiing? What's going on? What's happening there? So it really does help cement a relationship that you can't get just from that phone call, and especially not from an email chain back and forth.
That's right. So I feel that the PR Maven podcast has definitely helped strengthen our relationships with our current clients. And I feel like Peter would say the same thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've, from a safety standpoint, relationship is really important. You can manage safety through policy and procedure, but if anybody is a manager of things and they try to get things done with people, like to be a safety manager, you're kind of a manager of things. You really have to help people, but getting people to do the safety things that you want them to do is all about relationship. And the podcast does help that. So when our policyholders get a visit from one of the safety management consultants and they're talking about a particular safety topic, or they've got a particular challenge, we can point them in the direction of one of our written resources, or we can point them in the direction of our podcast too. And that gives another voice and some relationship to the topic or the content there. And then from a relationship through with our policyholders as well, we've had a couple of policyholders that have come on to talk about the success they've had with different types of safety programs and processes. And it helps cement the relationship there. We learn from them, they learn from us. And it gets the word out about what we're doing as a company. And it also gets the word out about what that particular company is doing and how successful they can be. And even more importantly, I think, because we do try to highlight this through the podcast, what some of the struggles are. You don't always hear the struggles in the commercials that are out there, like when you're trying to promote something. But the struggle and the success through struggle is a story that can be told very well through the podcast medium or through that audio medium. And you mentioned before, Nancy, that you used StreamYard and to push out to YouTube, to have a visual element of your podcast as well. And I think that's really important. We don't tend to do that often. Ours is more just an audio part, but the visual, like knowing who Nancy Marshall is, to see you on video, really does help to create relationship and helps create a personal connection between the listeners and yourself.
That's
So
right.
it's a great medium for all of that. And it can help attract new customers and customer growth, but it doesn't happen right away. It's going to happen over time. That's not going to be the instant checkbox or switch that happens and you get more people coming to your site or more people coming to your business because you've had 2 episodes out there. It's going to take some time to grow.
I'm glad you said that, Peter, because a lot of people will start a podcast and go great guns and enthusiastically launch their new podcast, and then they'll create like 7 episodes and be done. So this is what I call the long game, similar to public relations, really. It's something that it's like slow drip coffee. It's not like a Keurig cup. So you've got to be committed to it over time. And I actually wrote this book, Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand, during the pandemic, actually, because I had a little extra time in 2020. And part of the idea of growing a brand is growing your network and growing your audience. You want to be the one that people think of when they need what you have to offer. So if people need insurance, you want them to think of MEMIC. And when you need public relations, we want them to think of Marshall Communications. And one of the great things about podcasting is you can invite guests on who will then promote to their network and their audience. You know, we encourage our guests to be sharing on LinkedIn and on their Instagram and their Facebook and their TikTok and all their various social media platforms. So, you know, we've had John Lee Dumas on the PR Maven podcast, for example. I don't know if you know who JLD is, but he's a pretty big deal. He's got a pretty big podcast. He's originally from the Portland area. Actually, Tommy, he would be a great guest to have at one of these events. But JLD is somebody who, you know, was able to bring his audience over to the PR Maven podcast audience. So that was really good for our brand. Yeah, please, if you have questions, type them in the comments. But go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so it's a fantastic point too. It's a way to get your information or your I won't say content, but your brand out into a whole segment that you might not be able to reach in any other way. So you think about if you're coming at it from a business ownership standpoint, and you want different people to know about who you are, it's hit or miss sometimes. You can put a commercial out someplace on the radio and you get whoever's listening at that time or whenever it airs. You can try TV, you can try YouTube, and it's not always the people that, well, it's not always the people that you initially target. Having a podcast and having somebody on and then having them take that podcast and promote it on their social media expands exponentially who you can contact and who you get in touch with. So, you know, someone who might be listening to our podcast, right? One of our podcasts can take that and promote it in their social media, on their YouTube, on their Facebook. And all of a sudden you get a whole nother group of people who gets introduced to Nancy Marshall or to Peter Koch or to the PR Maven or to MEMIC or whatever product that you have. Could be a bakery, could be a restaurant, could be a tractor supply company, doesn't matter who it is. When you start to bring outside guests in and a guest that might have a podcast or have a following, now all of a sudden you can connect into that group. And it's not a bad thing to have that happen. I mean, it really does help kind of crowdsource, so to speak, the marketing side of it. It's that the old guerrilla marketing that I know Nancy used to do when you were working in the ski industry and going out and getting all that paper into people's hands or driving the tape down to the local to local
TV stations. Yeah, Peter, you've listened to my stories.
I have.
I'm impressed. And I've listened to yours too. And this is, so because one of the episodes that Peter did around 4th of July was actually about grilling safety, like grilling meats and this, making sure that you keep them cold and that the potato salad doesn't get rancid. So it's like so many different ways of talking about your subject. And Peter, a point you had made when we were thinking about this whole presentation was previously people might have just thought about safety as far as, when they get on an airplane, the steward or the stewardess is doing that demonstration about putting your oxygen on first. But through the Safety Experts podcast, you guys have figured out how to talk about it in a whole bunch of new ways, which makes it really engaging. So it does lead to what we call surprising results and outcomes. And it helps you reinforce your brand promise to your listeners and your customers.
Yeah, it really does. When we first started the podcast, the intent was to get information out to people, for it to be another resource for our policyholders, for the community to know more about safety and give us an opportunity to go maybe a little bit deeper into a particular topic around safety that you might not know. And some surprising parts, like we can talk about grilling safety, we can talk about the 4th of July and get the message out there to people about, well, hey, did you think about this? Are you paying attention to these things while you're out there, not just in a works platform or in a work environment, but even in your personal environment? One of the real surprising outcomes for us was that as our podcast has gotten out there, we've had a number of people contact us to want to be on our podcast, which was the first time it happened was it felt really good. It wasn't, you're sitting here as the host, you're going through, and we'll talk about the process of how the podcast here works in a minute and the things that go into that. But you're sitting there to talk about those things or thinking about those things. You're doing some writing for it and you're wondering, well, who's listening? You can get statistics, you can see who downloads, but then you get that phone call or an email from somebody who said, hey, I heard your podcast. I've got a story that I think will fit into that. And it could come from a product supplier, or it could come from someone who's got a message that they find to meet up with yours. And so one of our parts that we talk about often at MEMIC is safety leadership. Like, you can't have safety in a book. You have to have safety that comes from the heart. It comes as part of the leadership group that you have at your company. Whether you've got one employee or you got 1,000 employees, there must be leaders there that bring safety as a priority. And so we did a couple of podcasts with internal experts, and then we've had a couple of people. Patrick Nelson has been one of those who has come on our podcast, who reached out to us and was like, hey, I've got a message. I talk about safety and safety leadership from his experience in the military. And it was a fantastic conversation to have. And that expanded not only my knowledge around workplace safety and leadership, but it helped expand our brand around safety and safety leadership too, by someone else who reached out to us to come on and talk about something that converged with our message, which I really thought was fantastic. And it was surprising to me that happened. And it happened within a couple of years of having the podcasts up and live.
Peter, I just want to point out Doug Packard, who we know from the chamber, said that several of his peers in other locations have podcasts, and he's been considering one of his own. So thanks for that comment, Doug. And Peter, I wanted to ask you, you told me there's a concept called nudging. Can you explain that?
I can. So funny, I was just editing that podcast yesterday. So another interesting result. We had we had a company reach out to us that does safety research, and we did a podcast around logging safety, and they connected us with Dr. Julie Sorensen, who is the director of a research center who has done some research into how nudging, which is a psychological concept, how nudging can help improve safety. And the concept of nudging, which how it fits into the safety process, is removing barriers to making the right choice. So it's an interesting thing. Whenever you think about safety, you're trying to make sure people are safe. Well, nudging comes at it from the perspective of how can I make the safe choice the easy choice and not have to make it a choice at all. So I just do it more out of habit than anything else. So the concept of nudging, there's a lot to it. We actually have a 2-part episode with Julie talking about nudging and the process of how it works and what they've actually done to bring it into the agricultural scene. They actually work with a number of farms, and they use the concept of nudging to help reduce the number of chemical spills and the back strains within the process of managing chemicals within a large farm. So it was a really interesting episode, learned quite a bit about it. And I would never have known that unless we had someone come on the podcast to talk about it or reach out to us to say, hey, I've got this cool thing that works with safety. What do you think? And then me taking a chance on that, talking to the individual, finding out a little bit more about them and be like, yeah, this would really fit in well with our podcast process.
Well, thanks for that explanation, Peter. And I just want to also say that in addition to the topics and figuring out your guests and the questions, there's also some technology aspects. And Emma Dimmick, who works with me, we could bring her on camera if she's willing. Hi, Emma.
Hey, Emma.
She helps me with, well, she's essentially the producer of the PR Maven podcast. And I thought maybe Emma could go through some of the various technology platforms that we use. Do you mind, Emma?
Sure. So as you had mentioned earlier, we do use StreamYard. We use that to record the episodes and stream them live to Facebook, our PR Maven Nation Facebook group, the Marshall Communications YouTube page, and the Marshall Communications LinkedIn. So that's one of the ways that we're getting the podcast out to our audience. And then we also do audio-only versions on Libsyn, and that distributes it out to a bunch of different podcast platforms, such as Apple Podcasts. We also use SoundCloud, which is kind of like Libsyn. And then we have a flash briefing for Alexa devices, and we use Effect for that. So we just upload the 1 to 2 minute flash briefing into Effect, and it distributes it out to people who have enabled our flash briefing. And then we also create blog posts using company called Podreacher to develop articles based on each of our podcast episodes. And then we can post that on our blog and share it on our social media. So there's really a lot of ways that you can use the content that you're creating through the podcast.
Thanks for that, Emma. And I should also mention that we record at the studio, which is on Casco Street in Portland. Their web address is thestudioportland.com, and we'll send that out to everybody after. But the Ryan and Emily Ordway, Ryan's an audio engineer. He does a great job of making sure the sound quality is good, and then he does the editing for us. So again, as you can tell from what Emma said, and then the fact that we use a recording studio, I believe Peter has his own studio that MEMIC helped him set up, but there is more to it than may meet the eye. So I think, again, if you're going to get into podcasting, You need to be prepared. There's a time investment and a financial investment, and you don't want to just do it and hope that people will find out about it. You need to actively market your podcast. But on the flip side, it does help you generate a lot of really good content. I'm actually looking at the blog post right now that we did for episode number 160, and we'll send that out to everybody after. But that was the episode that Peter was on of the PR Maven podcast. And, we have this company that does blog posts for us to help us streamline our process. And they cull out all of the really best points and put it in writing. And that content is something we share in a whole variety of places: our blog, our newsletters, our social media.
Hey, Nancy, we got a question from Morgan Stickney in there. I think it's a great one to talk about. It's a question about collaboration and how, coming from podcasting guests, bringing their own audiences and lead to positive audience crossover. How's that changing how we view business collaboration? Which I think it's a great question to talk about in this piece. And I do think it is changing the way you think about business collaboration. I think there's more of a not me alone, but me and the community, because you have different means of not only communicating this way, but bringing other people on into your world, and then you can come into their world as well. So I do think podcasting specifically is helping to change some of the collaboration or the collaborative nature of business. What do you think?
Yeah, Peter, I mean, this is an example of how you and I are collaborating on this presentation. And, we've been on each other's podcast. When I came on the Safety Experts podcast, I talked about how important safety is to a brand and an employer brand too, because right now, especially with so many companies struggling to get employees, you want to work in a safe workplace. You don't want to go to work and get injured or killed or have a terrible accident. So employers want to put out there that they're a safe place to work. And so that's what we talked about on the episode that I came on of the Safety Experts. But in answer to your question, Morgan, this medium opens up so many ways of collaborating, and we've actually taken it to having live events also. We've had a variety of ways of celebrating our most popular guest of the year. One year it was actually Carl Strand from Sugarloaf. He's the general manager and president of Sugarloaf. And we had an event during the pandemic, actually outside in front of the fireplace on the beach at Sugarloaf to recognize him. And then we've had events at breweries and at wine bars and where we invite people in. And so I just love, you can be really creative. I've also done live podcasts when I've given speeches in front of chambers of commerce, like the Kennebec Valley Chamber. Tommy, I hope you don't mind if I mention another chamber on this presentation, but when I gave a presentation on public relations, we streamed it live as part of the PR Maven podcast. So the sky's the limit as far as how creative you can be.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nancy, the live part of the podcasting. So you can do a live podcast, you can do a pre-recorded podcast, and doing live on location, I think, is a really cool way to bring your brand to someplace else and engage people. So you could do that. We've done some podcast recording at safety conferences before, where we've talked to vendors before. We've talked to other people who are presenting at the safety conference before and done the podcast through that. So, cross-promoting the safety conference, cross-promoting ourselves, cross-promoting the individual and their message that they're talking about it fit really well in for us. And then we can, you talked about Tim Winkler coming on as part of VIP, right? And being the most popular guest on your podcast. And so at the podcast, so Tim and I know each other outside of the safety and business world, but having a conversation around, hey, so it's winter, it's going to be tire safety season pretty soon. And what a great way to connect two people that I am passionate about safety. Tim's super passionate about tires. Let's have a conversation around tire safety. So another way for collaboration to happen. And
I didn't know you were doing that, but that's awesome.
Yeah, we're going to work towards that. We've had preliminary conversations, and then, life gets in the way. We haven't quite gotten to it yet. So it might be next year, who knows? But the collaborative nature of that is, I think we're moving away from it's just me as the business, and it's me, the business, in the community. You have the Portland Chamber of Commerce, which is a great leader of trying to bring all the community members together within the business to share expertise, to share knowledge, to share challenges, to share successes. And the podcast is another way to be collaborative across different types of businesses. Like, who would have thought that a PR podcast and a safety podcast would get together, right? And so the impetus about you coming on to the safety podcast was not just reciprocation. Well, we're going to have Nancy on because I was on her podcast.
We owe it to her.
Right. But it was I was sitting around thinking, well, if I'm a safety manager, how do I promote safety? Like, how do I make safety a brand? Because it is, like, if it's not just a brand as part of your company, but internally, as you want to promote safety, how do you make it a brand? And you talked very poignantly about how you can do that, or the different things that a manager or a supervisor could do to help promote safety, to make it either their personal brand or fit it into their company brand. So that was a really cool collaboration between us.
Yeah, and actually storytelling is so important in branding. And if you give stories to, again, your listeners, then they can share those stories with other people and they become brand ambassadors. One story I remember you talking about, Peter, was a father of a young lady who was going to go to work at a ski resort as a lift operator. And the father was concerned about whether this was going to be a safe place for his daughter to work. And again, that story just stuck in my mind because I've got two sons, and they've both worked in various positions at Sugarloaf. My son Jamie drove the Moose caboose actually, and Craig coached skiing. But you always want to know that your kids are going to be safe if they're working someplace also. So.
That particular part there, Nancy, Doug Packard made a comment in there about prospecting the real feel for someone. So that dad, and that they reached out to me actually as the safety manager at a ski area and wanted to know what we would do. So that's a really unique person to reach out to a company and say, hey, who are you? How are you going to help keep my daughter, my spouse, my whoever safe? That doesn't happen very often. People will gain an understanding or an impression about a person or a company from what your public presence is. And your public presence is, it's hard sometimes to be consistent and to hit all the points. But podcasting is one of those pieces, like Doug said, that you can make a powerful impression with your brand through podcasting. So what is important to you as a company, and how can I talk about that? It could be a solo podcast. I've done solo podcasts before without the guest to talk about a particular topic that's important for the moment. And I've all brought guests on to talk about similar things. So there's different ways that you can use podcasting to help people understand who you are and who your company is, to give them that impression. So that great comment, Doug. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, because I always say that if someone is going to do business with you, they have to first know about you. They have to like you, and then they have to trust you. They have to trust that you're going to deliver on the brand promise. And yeah, there's no better way than to establish an ongoing relationship where people know, like, and trust you enough to want to listen to your podcast. So on this slide, Emma helped us lay out the checklist, and we do have a lot of checklists. So as we say here, it is more work than you may think. This is a checklist that we go through for every episode. And you may have fewer things that you do or more things than you do, but you want to, especially if you're doing a weekly podcast as we are, you have to figure out the recording dates. We sometimes will record several episodes in a day. Sometimes we do have guests. Sometimes we do what we call solo casts. You need to make a good connection with the guest so you can introduce them and ask them relevant questions. We do the live stream so people can watch live. We do an episode rundown. This content is really good for search engine optimization. So if you have a transcript of the episode that you can put online, that has a lot of really good keywords that people will find in a search. So, Google, I always say Google is like Santa Claus. It knows whether you're good or bad. And, if you're really good at search engine optimization, then you're going to put a lot of your content online on an ongoing basis, because Google likes you to have relevant content that's new and updated. Like, they don't want to just see stuff that you put on there 5 years ago. So having new content every week will make the Google Santa Claus happy. Audio quality is really important. I know people don't really like to listen to something that's breaking up all the time and crackling. And so then we record the episodes. We do these Alexa flash briefings. So if you use, I'm a little hesitant to say that word out loud because I actually have a device for Alexa, and I think she's going to start talking to me right now. So, but we do an Alexa flash briefing every day. So you could listen to those by enabling the skill of the flash briefing on your device. We do show notes. We do an audiogram that we put on our Instagram. So that's kind of like follow the bouncing ball. It's a graphic where you can see the words and hear us saying it from a segment of the episode. We do social media graphics that we send to the guests that they can share with their audience. Again, a big part of this process is tapping into the audiences of your guests. So if you can get guests that have big audiences, that's going to help you expand your listenership. We do a lot of social media about the PR Maven podcast. And then we do a reminder email to all of our listeners to tune in. So
a pretty extensive list. And if there are people listening out there that you've got questions, like how much of this do you actually need to do? Great time to ask a question, because we could talk about what are the most important things out there that if you're just getting into it, what might you want to set up? You mentioned audio quality, Nancy, and I think audio quality is one of the biggest pieces. You could have the best script or the best content, but if your audio quality is staticky, if it's tinny, if it's not great, if it breaks up a lot, and think about that just as yourself, you will turn the channel, you will change to something else, you will skip the podcast, and you may never even go back to give them another chance if this is the first time. It
reflects your brand quality. I mean, it's all about your brand.
It definitely does. And as much work as goes into the actual recording of the podcast, there's probably just as much work as goes into working with the guest to know them, to figure out what threads you're going to talk about. So you can script questions or you can have general threads, and it's really dependent upon the guest that you have. If as you feel them out to try to determine what they need to be successful on your podcast, sometimes the guest needs questions. Other times the guest just needs some threads, some point A, point B, point C, point D, and you can connect all those dots throughout the podcast instead of having a set of scripted questions. But it's really truly dependent upon you as the host and the guest as well. How good will they be at being spontaneous with some of the threads that you have? And then the length of the podcast is important too. How much time do you want to spend? Do you want to be an hour? Do you want to be a half an hour? Do you want to be 15 minutes? Do you want to be a Jocko Willink and have a 4-hour or 5-hour podcast? You could do the whole gamut. But I tell you, if you're going to go 4 or 5 hours, you better have some solid content and be a really good podcast host, because I've listened to some of his on long drives and they're fantastic. And you're 2 hours into it and you don't feel that it's 2 hours into it. But I've also listened to some and you're 15 minutes into it and you're thinking, when are they going to get finished?
Yawn.
So it's really important. And then the follow-up, the important part of the follow-up is making sure that you do your due diligence and get the message out there. The marketing part of that is a key part.
Oh yeah. It's not like a field of dreams where you can build it and they will come. You need to tell people about it. And also one of the really great things is that all of your episodes are online. So we sometimes are still promoting episodes that we did several years ago, especially if there's something newsworthy that's in the news. We do something called newsjacking, where we're trying to take advantage of something that's in the news. And then, for example, when Queen Elizabeth died, we did some relevant content about the monarchy and lessons that you could learn from the monarchy. So that's an example of newsjacking that we did with our podcast.
Hey,
Now,
Nancy,
go ahead, Peter.
I wanted to just jump right back. There's a question that came in about investing in audio equipment. And you'd be surprised, a good computer and a good headset with a microphone. You don't have to have a headset like mine or a microphone like mine. If you're just getting into it, you can spend some money on a good computer, a USB headset, to be able to record into your computer. And then there are services that you can use, like StreamYard or like Riverside. There's a couple of others that are out there that will record at really high quality. So some of the challenges when you try to record through Zoom or through WebEx or some of the other web conferencing platforms that are there, it compresses the audio and it's not great. And so when you edit it and then you save it again, it compresses it even further and the audio is flat. It doesn't have a lot of the depth that you really want to hear, like the NPR voice that you like to hear on the radio. So look to some of those, listen to it, try a couple of proof of concepts if you're thinking to get into it, and send them to your friends and send them to your colleagues to listen and see if they like it. Because you will not like your voice when you hear it the first time, right, Nancy? You will not like your voice when you hear it. But other people will give you great feedback about how it works. So don't spend a lot right up front. Spend enough to make it quality. And then if this is something that works for you, then you can upgrade as you go. So there's no need to spend thousands of dollars into a studio right at first. The first proof of concept that I did was basically with a computer headset right into my computer using an Adobe recording program, which is what we use to get the first few episodes done.
Yeah, and if you don't want to go ahead and start your own podcast, you can go on other people's podcasts also. Yeah. So that's maybe an avenue you might want to explore initially. There are actually even agents, there's companies that will help you get on other people's podcasts. I know that I get contacted all the time by these agents who are representing clients. And I actually have gone on a lot of other people's podcasts as well. I imagine you have too, right, Peter? In addition to mine.
Yeah, I've been on a couple, yeah. And that's a great way to get your message out with only really investing in a computer headset. You don't have to do the recording. You don't have to do anything else. but you need to reach out to those people. So as you hear other podcasts, as you hear things that are there and it resonates with you and you have a message that connects with that podcast, reach out to them. Just like when someone reached out to me, I was ecstatic that someone reached out to the MEMIC Safety Experts podcast to be on our podcast. And then I had to vet them, but it worked out really, really well. So take the chance, put yourself out there and see this. It's a great way to see if you really like this platform, because you might like it because you listen to it, but being on somebody's podcast is a really good way to determine whether or not you can be a good guest. And that might give you an idea if you can be a good host as well.
And then the other thing is, if you don't want to create an ongoing podcast, you might want to just do 4 episodes about a certain topic and put those out. So it might be to promote an event that's going to be an in-person event, or it might be about a relevant topic that you want to delve into. So again, be creative and do some green light thinking about all the possibilities. So hopefully that answers your question, Morgan.
That's fantastic. It's a really interesting way. Like when you said, do a 4-part series, you can think seasonally. If your business runs seasonally and you got more people coming in the summer, you could do a podcast that talks about how different you are, how you connect with your customers in the summertime. It could be something special that you're doing because you've just did an outside part of your business. Like you've gone from inside operations to both inside and outside operations, or something special had occurred. So do the podcast, put it up there that you've got it in perpetuity, and you can revisit it each year as that season changes. So it's another good way. It's a different medium. And people like to listen. People don't like to read, right? We know that people don't read signs. So this is a great way to give people another way to hear your message.
Are there any other questions? Feel free to type your questions in the comments. We really appreciate the people that have given us questions, Morgan, Douglas, and the comment from the studio of Portland. So any other questions on podcasting? We do hope that you will listen to our podcasts and, follow us on social media.
I think, Nancy, I'm not a question really, but like we did at the beginning, reaching out to Marshall Communications, because we're both local Portland businesses, reaching out to you because you've got such great experience with podcasting, and especially around the marketing side of the podcast. How do I get that out there? What do I need to do? You're a great resource for that. And I would certainly suggest that if there's someone out there who is wondering about the podcast, they've heard this today and they're thinking, maybe that's something for me, you could reach out to Nancy or reach out to the studio or to one of the other companies that are out there that help local podcasters get a leg up on the process and do a good job with it. Because the pre-planning, it's all about the pre-planning. You will be more successful if you have a good plan going into it.
Right. And you should definitely record at least 3 episodes before you launch so that you have, enough episodes to get some momentum. Also, there is a book called Podcasting Made Simple by Daniel Larson that has some really basic information. And this is a quick read. So I would recommend that. We'll put that in an email that we'll send to you after as well. So I can see Tommy has come back on, and Tommy, I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. And I know that we enjoyed being here. Thank you. Oops, you're muted.
Force of habit. You would think after 3 years we would learn, right? No, the fantastic presentation, you guys. And I loved all the sort of connections to some of the other partners you've worked with, whether it be other chambers and certainly our friends here in Portland over at the studio. We got a lot of people that are very interested. And I know my email and my phone have been kind of blowing up this morning. So I think people are ready to dip their toe in the water. I want to say thanks again to both Nancy and Peter. Another great presentation. And thanks to all the chamber staff for helping produce another successful event. And to each of you for attending today throughout this year. If you're interested in learning more about the benefits of creating a podcast, be sure to check your email for a follow-up message tomorrow with links to additional resources. Peter and Nancy already sent us some great links that I know that you'll find very interesting. Another shout out again to our sponsors at Eaton Peabody for their continued support of the Growth Basics for Business series. We look forward to seeing you next year on January 17th when we hear from our friends at LaBelle and Harriman, and I believe from the state of Maine, on the topic of Maine's upcoming retirement plan mandate. The Eaton Peabody Growth Basics for Business series is typically held on the second or third Tuesday of each month, so stay tuned for details moving forward. With that, have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy a very happy holiday season.
Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.